I'm not ashamed.
What would happen to the leftover bread that Israel kept until the next morning? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Exodus chapter 16. We're going to be reading from verses 17 to 21. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Exodus chapter 16, beginning at verse 17. Then the children of Israel did so, and gathered some more, some less. So when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered according to each one's need. And Moses said, let no one leave any of it till morning. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses. But some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. And when the sun became hot, it melted. In this episode, we still find the children of Israel in the wilderness of sin. This wilderness is in what we would call Saudi Arabia today, in between Elam, the place where Israel had just come from, and the region of Sinai. As we know, the children of Israel are traveling towards Sinai in order to be given their law. While in this wilderness, the children of Israel complained to Moses that they had no food, and that Moses had brought them out into the wilderness to die. This is probably less than 2 weeks after the Red Sea crossing, which not only shows how short Israel's memory is, but their lack of faith in God as well. God hears Israel's cry and promises them to provide them bread in the morning and quail in the evening. In our last episode, God gave instructions through Moses and Aaron as to how this bread and quail was to be collected. First of all, the quail would only come in the evening, so they needed to collect it in the evening. In the morning, they would find dew on the ground, and when the dew had lifted, they would find small round substances as fine as frost on the ground. This would be the bread that the Lord provided. When Israel collected this bread, they were not to be greedy. They were to take only what they needed for the day, for God would provide them this each day. To help them understand what each person needed, each person was rationed an omer of this bread. An omer is about 2.3 to 3.64 liters, or 0.6 to 1 gallon. So if you had a family of 3, you would need 3 omers, and if you had a family of 10, you would need 10 omers. They would collect an omer each day except on the 6th day, when each person was to take 2 omers, double what their usual allotment was. The reason that this is because the 7th day is the Sabbath day, and that would be a day of rest, so gathering would not be done on that day. Verse 4 of the chapter says that providing the children of Israel this way would be a test to see if they would obey God's commandments. If they followed God's instructions that he gave them, they would be fed. But if they didn't, they would not be fed. Coming now to today's reading, we find that the children of Israel gathered this bread. Some gathered more and some less. By this, I do not believe that some people gathered more than 1 omer per person and some gathered less. What I believe it is saying is that some families were larger and some were smaller, so some gathered more and some gathered less. He who gathered more had nothing left over, and he who gathered less had no lack. So often in our society, the rich and those in power have advantages that those with less do not have. So the rich and powerful have in abundance, and those who are poor lack in necessities. Having a large family created a potential for them to be able to collect more, leaving those with smaller families with nothing to eat. God didn't provide for Israel this way. Everybody, whether in a big family or a small family, was provided for according to his need. The next commandment that Moses gave Israel was to leave none of what they collected until morning. Why? Because God would supply their needs the next day. Relying on God this way would teach the children of Israel a valuable lesson, a lesson in faith and trust, a lesson they desperately needed. Likewise, it is with us today. Jesus said in Matthew 6:11 to his followers to pray that God would provide our daily bread. God many times gives to us abundantly, but we still need to rely on God for our daily needs. Even though we might have food left over from yesterday, doesn't mean that we shouldn't pray to God and thank him for our daily bread. Instead of heeding Moses, though, they kept some of the bread until morning. They did not trust that God would provide them food the next day, or maybe that he wouldn't provide it in the same abundance, or maybe they just wanted more than 1 omer. Whatever the case was, though, they did not obey God through Moses. God wasn't going to allow disobedience to go unpunished. He wasn't going to allow them to keep any leftover bread, so that which was left until morning bred worms and stank. Moses was naturally angry with Israel for their disobedience, an emotion that would build up over time through Israel's continued disobedience and ultimately get Moses into trouble later on in the book of Numbers. So it was that Israel gathered bread every morning according to his need, but by the time it became hot in the day, the bread that was in the field melted, meaning that they could not go back later in the day to get more bread. They would have to wait until the next day. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Exodus chapter 16, verses 22 to 26, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.